When the storms of life rise without warning, everything familiar can begin to shake. The ground beneath us no longer feels steady, and the future becomes clouded with uncertainty. In those moments, human strength proves limited. Plans fail, resources run dry, and even the strongest hearts feel fragile. Yet it is precisely in these seasons of turmoil that prayer becomes our strongest anchor, not because it removes the storm instantly, but because it holds us steady while the storm rages. Life's storms come in many forms. Some arrive suddenly, like unexpected loss or devastating news. Others build slowly, like ongoing struggles, prolonged illness, financial pressure, or quiet loneliness that settles deep within the soul. No one is exempt. Faith does not make us immune to hardship. It gives us a place to stand when hardship comes. Prayer is that place. It is the anchor that reaches beyond what is visible and secures us to the unchanging nature of God. An anchor does not stop the waves, but it prevents the ship from being swept away. In the same way, prayer does not deny pain or pretend trouble does not exist. Instead, it keeps the heart from drifting into despair. When fear threatens to pull us under, prayer grounds us in truth. It reminds us that God is still sovereign, still loving, still near, even when circumstances scream otherwise. In the middle of a storm, the mind often races with questions. Why is this happening? How will this end? What if things never change? These questions can become overwhelming, stealing peace and robbing sleep. Prayer interrupts that spiral. It shifts our focus from what we cannot control to the one who holds all things together. When we pray, we acknowledge that while the storm may be powerful, God is greater still. Many people turn to prayer only when everything else has failed, treating it as a last resort. But prayer was never meant to be a final option. It was meant to be our first response. From the beginning of time, people have cried out to God in moments of danger, confusion, and pain, not because they had all the answers, but because they knew where to bring their questions. Prayer is an act of trust, declaring that God hears, God cares, and God acts according to His perfect will. In life's storms, prayer becomes deeply personal. It is no longer about routine words or memorized phrases. It becomes raw, honest, and sometimes wordless. There are moments when tears speak louder than sentences, when silence itself becomes a prayer, and God understands. He is not distant or detached from human suffering. He draws near to the broken-hearted and listens closely to every cry, even the ones we cannot fully express. Fear is one of the strongest winds in any storm. It whispers lies that we are alone, forgotten, or beyond help. Prayer confronts those lies with truth. Each time we pray, we remind our hearts that God has not abandoned us. He is present in the storm, not just waiting for it to pass. His presence does not always change the situation immediately, but it changes us. It strengthens us to endure what we could never face alone. Prayer anchors us because it reconnects us with hope. Storms have a way of shrinking our perspective until all we can see is the problem in front of us. Prayer lifts our eyes beyond the waves. It reminds us of past faithfulness, of prayers once answered, of valleys once survived. Hope grows when we remember that the same God who carried us then is with us now. There are times when prayer feels difficult. The storm is so loud that God feels silent. In those moments, faith is tested. Yet even then, prayer remains powerful. Continuing to pray when answers are delayed is an act of deep trust. It says, "I may not understand, but I still believe." Anchors are tested most when the waters are rough, and faith, strengthened through persistent prayer, becomes unshakable. Prayer also brings peace, not the kind that depends on circumstances improving, but the kind that settles the soul even when nothing changes on the outside. This peace does not deny reality, it transcends it. It allows us to breathe again, to rest in the assurance that God is in control. In the midst of chaos, prayer creates a sacred space where calm replaces panic and trust replaces fear. Storms often reveal what we rely on most. When everything else is stripped away, prayer reveals that God alone is sufficient. The storm may take comfort, security, or certainty, but it cannot take God's presence. Prayer becomes the lifeline that keeps us connected to Him. It is where strength is renewed, courage is restored, and weary hearts find rest. Sometimes prayer changes the storm, other times it changes the one standing in the storm. Both are miracles in their own way. There are moments when God calms the waves, and moments when He steadies His child so they can walk through them. Prayer anchors us to trust that either outcome is guided by His wisdom and love. Life's storms also teach us compassion. When we have been anchored by prayer in our own trials, we become more sensitive to the struggles of others. We learn to pray not only for ourselves, but for those around us. Our pain becomes a source of empathy, and our prayers become broader, deeper, and more selfless. What once threatened to break us becomes a testimony of God's sustaining grace. Prayer reminds us that storms are temporary, but God is eternal. No season lasts forever. Though the night may feel long, morning will come. Prayer keeps us holding on until it does. It keeps our hearts from hardening and our faith from fading. It keeps us believing that even when we cannot see the way forward, God is already there. In the fiercest storms, prayer teaches surrender. Not surrender to fear, but surrender to God's will. This is not weakness, it is strength. It is the recognition that God's plans are higher than ours, and His understanding deeper than ours. When we surrender in prayer, we place our lives fully into His hands, trusting that He knows what we need better than we do. Anchors are meant to go deep. Superficial faith cannot withstand life's greatest storms. Prayer drives our faith deeper, beyond surface-level belief into a resilient trust that holds firm under pressure. It teaches us to rely not on what we feel, but on what we know to be true about God's character. He is faithful, He is good, He is near. There may be moments when prayer feels unanswered, when the storm continues longer than expected. In those moments, prayer sustains us. It keeps us from giving up. It reminds us that silence does not mean absence. God is working even when we cannot see it, shaping hearts, opening doors, and preparing outcomes that align with His purpose. When the storm finally passes, and it will, prayer leaves us changed. We emerge stronger, wiser, and more grounded in faith. We realize that what carried us through was not our own strength, but God's faithfulness accessed through prayer. The anchor held. The storm did not win. Prayer becomes our strongest anchor because it ties us to something unmovable. When everything else shakes, God remains firm. When the waves rise, His promises remain true. When fear threatens, His peace prevails. Prayer is not an escape from reality. It is an encounter with the one who reigns over it. So when the storm comes, do not let go. Pray. When fear rises, pray. When words fail, pray. Let prayer anchor your heart, steady your soul, and remind you that you are held securely by a God who does not fail. And even in the midst of life's fiercest storms, you will discover a powerful truth. Anchored in prayer, you will not be moved. There is a deep longing in every human heart for peace, not the temporary calm that comes when problems seem to disappear, but a lasting peace that holds firm even when life is shaken. People search for peace in changed circumstances, better health, more money, restored relationships, easier seasons. They believe that if only this problem were solved or that burden lifted, peace would finally come. Yet history and experience teach us a powerful truth. Circumstances may change, but they never stay changed for long. One problem ends and another begins. True peace cannot be built on something so fragile. True peace comes from God's presence, not from the absence of trouble. Life does not move in straight, predictable lines. It moves through valleys and mountains, joy and sorrow, certainty and confusion. One day everything feels secure, and the next day the ground beneath our feet seems to shift. Health can fail, jobs can disappear, people we love can leave, and dreams can collapse without warning. If our peace depends on everything going right, then peace will always remain just out of reach. But when peace is rooted in God's presence, it becomes steady, unshakable, and real. God never promised a life without hardship, but He did promise that He would never leave us. His presence is not limited to moments of success and celebration. It is most powerful in moments of weakness and loss. When everything familiar is stripped away, God remains. When the noise of life fades and we are left alone with our fears, God draws near. His presence does not remove every tear, but it gives meaning to every tear. It does not always change the situation, but it changes us within the situation. Many people misunderstand peace, thinking it means the absence of pain or conflict. But peace, as God gives it, is deeper than circumstances. It is a settled assurance in the soul that no matter what happens, we are safe in God's hands. It is the quiet confidence that even when answers are delayed and the future is unclear, God is still in control. This kind of peace cannot be manufactured by human effort. It cannot be bought, earned, or forced. It is a gift that flows from a living relationship with God. In the darkest moments of life, when prayers feel heavy and hope seems distant, God's presence becomes our greatest comfort. There are times when God does not immediately fix what is broken. He does not always calm the storm around us, but He calms the storm within us. He speaks peace to the heart even while the winds still howl. This peace defies logic. It exists where fear should reign. It stands firm where despair should take over, and it testifies to a truth greater than circumstances. God is near. Pain has a way of teaching us what truly matters. It reveals the weakness of relying on circumstances for peace. When everything is going well, it is easy to believe that peace comes from comfort and stability. But when comfort is gone and stability collapses, we learn that peace must come from something deeper. In these moments, God invites us to lean into His presence. He invites us to trust not in outcomes, but in His character. He invites us to believe that He is good, even when life is not. God's presence does not always come with dramatic signs or loud declarations. Often it comes quietly, in a stillness that settles the heart, in a sense of being held when strength is gone, in a reassurance that we cannot explain but deeply feel. It comes in moments of prayer, when words fail but faith remains. It comes in tears that fall freely, knowing they are seen and understood by a loving God. True peace also teaches us to let go of control. Much of our anxiety comes from trying to manage outcomes we were never meant to control. We worry about tomorrow, replay yesterday, and struggle to hold everything together. God's presence invites us to rest. It reminds us that we are not responsible for carrying the weight of the world. When we surrender control and trust God with what we cannot change, peace begins to rise within us. There are seasons when life feels unfair, when prayers seem unanswered and suffering feels undeserved. In those moments, peace is not found in understanding everything, but in trusting someone. God does not always explain His ways, but He always reveals His faithfulness. His presence assures us that even when the path makes no sense, we are not walking alone. And that assurance brings peace that circumstances never could. True peace also transforms how we face the future. When peace depends on circumstances, the future becomes a source of fear. We worry about what might go wrong, what we might lose, and what pain might come. But when peace is rooted in God's presence, the future becomes a place of hope. We may not know what tomorrow holds, but we know who holds tomorrow. That knowledge steadies the heart and quiets the mind. God's presence gives us the strength to endure what we cannot escape. It gives us courage to face what we would rather avoid. It gives us hope when the road is long and the night feels endless. This peace does not make us immune to pain, but it keeps pain from destroying us. It guards our hearts against bitterness and our minds against despair. It reminds us that suffering is not the end of the story. Even in moments of loss, God's presence remains faithful. When loved ones are gone and words feel empty, His presence speaks comfort beyond language. When grief weighs heavy and time seems to stand still, His presence becomes a shelter. Peace, in these moments, is not the absence of sorrow, but the assurance that sorrow will not have the final word. God's presence assures us that love continues, hope endures, and healing will come in time. Many people spend their lives chasing peace, believing it will come once everything falls into place. But life rarely falls neatly into place. The truth is, peace does not wait for perfect conditions. It enters imperfect lives and broken situations through God's presence. It settles into hearts that choose trust over fear, faith over doubt, surrender over control. God's presence also teaches us to live one day at a time. Peace is found in the present moment, not in replaying the past or worrying about the future. When we rest in God's presence today, we receive the strength we need for today. Tomorrow's grace will come tomorrow. This daily dependence deepens our relationship with God and strengthens our faith. True peace reshapes our perspective. Problems may still exist, but they no longer define us. Fear may knock at the door, but it no longer rules the house. Circumstances may press in, but they no longer crush the spirit. God's presence lifts our eyes beyond the immediate struggle and reminds us of a greater reality, one where love, grace, and hope prevail. This peace also becomes a testimony to others. In a world driven by anxiety and uncertainty, a calm heart rooted in God's presence stands out. It speaks louder than words. It shows that there is a peace available that does not depend on success, comfort, or control. It points others toward the source of that peace, not a system, not a philosophy, but a living God who walks with His people. When life hurts, we are often tempted to withdraw, to isolate ourselves in our pain. But God's presence invites us closer. He does not demand strength, He offers it. He does not require answers, He provides comfort. When we draw near to Him, we discover that peace is not something we have to create, it is something we receive. There will always be reasons to worry if we look only at circumstances. The world is uncertain and life is fragile, but there will always be reasons to trust if we look to God. His faithfulness does not depend on the economy, human decisions, or changing seasons. He remains constant, and in that constancy, peace is found. True peace does not mean we will never feel afraid, sad, or overwhelmed. It means those feelings no longer control us. It means we bring them honestly into God's presence and allow Him to meet us there. Over time, His presence reshapes our hearts, strengthens our faith, and anchors our souls. One day, we may look back and realize that the moments we thought would break us were the moments that revealed God's nearness most clearly. The nights we cried out in weakness became the nights we discovered peace that made no sense to the world. The circumstances did not change overnight, but something deeper did. We learned to rest in God's presence. True peace is not fragile. It does not collapse when plans fail or when prayers take longer than expected. It stands firm because it is built on God Himself. And when we learn to seek His presence above all else, we discover that even in a world full of trouble, the heart can remain at rest. In the end, peace is not found by escaping life's difficulties, but by walking through them with God. His presence is enough, His peace is real, and no matter what circumstances may bring, the soul that rests in Him will never be without hope. Hope often feels fragile when life presses in from every side. It can seem like a small flame flickering in the wind, easily threatened by fear, disappointment, and uncertainty. Yet hope is not meant to rest on human strength or favorable circumstances. True hope is renewed when we surrender our burdens to God. It is reborn not when everything goes right, but when we place everything, especially what is broken, into His hands. Every human heart carries burdens. Some are visible, others hidden deep within. There are burdens of regret over past mistakes, burdens of grief from losses that still ache, burdens of fear about a future that feels uncertain, and burdens of responsibility that feel heavier each day. Many people try to carry these weights alone. They believe strength means silence and endurance means isolation, but the soul was never designed to carry such weight without help. When burdens are carried alone, they slowly drain hope, leaving behind exhaustion and despair. God never intended for us to live burdened lives. He invites us to bring our worries, fears, and failures to Him. Surrender is not weakness, it is trust. It is the recognition that God is greater than our problems and wiser than our understanding. When we surrender our burdens, we are not giving up. We are giving them over, and in that exchange, something powerful happens. The weight begins to lift, and hope begins to rise. Many people misunderstand surrender. They think it means accepting defeat or resigning themselves to pain. In truth, surrender is an act of faith. It is choosing to believe that God is at work even when we cannot see how. It is laying down the illusion of control and embracing the peace that comes from trusting a faithful God. When burdens are surrendered, they no longer define us. They become places where God's strength is revealed. Hope is often lost when we try to manage life on our own terms. We plan, strive, and struggle, believing that if we work harder or worry longer, we can fix what is broken. But worry does not solve problems, it multiplies them. Fear does not protect us, it paralyzes us. Only surrender opens the door to renewal. When we stop fighting alone and invite God into our struggles, hope finds room to breathe again. There are seasons when surrender feels especially difficult. Pain can make the heart guarded. Disappointment can make trust feel risky. Yet these are the very moments when surrender is most needed. God does not ask us to understand everything before we trust Him. He asks us to trust Him even when understanding is out of reach. Hope is not born from answers, it is born from relationship, and surrender deepens that relationship. When burdens are surrendered, peace begins to settle into the heart. Not the kind of peace that comes from everything being resolved, but the kind that comes from knowing God is in control. This peace steadies the mind and calms the soul. It reminds us that our lives are held by hands stronger than our fears. From that peace, hope grows, not hurried or forced, but quiet and steady. Many people discover that surrender changes the way they pray. Prayer becomes less about demanding solutions and more about seeking God's presence. It becomes a place of honesty rather than performance. Tears replace rehearsed words. Silence becomes as meaningful as speech, and in that sacred space, hope is gently restored. The heart learns that it is safe to trust, safe to rest, and safe to hope again. Burdens have a way of narrowing our vision. They make the problem feel larger than God, and the pain feel permanent. Surrender lifts our eyes beyond the immediate struggle. It reminds us that the present moment is not the final chapter. God is always working toward redemption, even when the process is hidden. Hope thrives when we remember that God's story is bigger than our suffering. There are times when surrender must be practiced daily, even moment by moment. Burdens have a habit of returning. Fear creeps back in, doubts resurface, and the temptation to take control reappears. But each act of surrender is a step toward freedom. Each prayer of release loosens the grip of anxiety. Over time, hope becomes less fragile and more resilient. Surrender also transforms the way we see ourselves. When burdens are held tightly, they often shape our identity. We begin to define ourselves by our failures, wounds, or limitations. But when those burdens are surrendered to God, identity is restored. We are no longer just people with problems, we are people held by grace. Hope flourishes when we remember who we are and whose we are. God does not waste surrendered burdens. He uses them to refine character, deepen compassion, and strengthen faith. What once felt like unbearable weight becomes a testimony of God's faithfulness. The very struggles that threatened hope become the soil where hope grows stronger. Surrender allows God to transform pain into purpose. Hope renewed through surrender is not loud or dramatic. It often arrives quietly, like dawn breaking after a long night. It shows up as the strength to get through one more day, the courage to pray again, or the willingness to trust despite fear. This hope is not naive optimism. It is grounded confidence in God's unchanging nature. There are moments when surrender means releasing outcomes we deeply desire. It means trusting God's will even when it differs from our own. This kind of surrender can be painful, but it is also freeing. It shifts the focus from what we want to what God knows is best. In that shift, hope becomes rooted in God's wisdom rather than our expectations. Surrender teaches patience. It reminds us that growth and healing often take time. Hope does not demand immediate results. It rests in God's timing. Waiting becomes less agonizing when burdens are surrendered, because the heart knows it is not waiting alone. God's presence fills the space where anxiety once lived. One of the most beautiful aspects of surrender is the way it deepens trust. Each time God proves faithful, hope becomes more secure. Past deliverance fuels future confidence. Even when new challenges arise, the heart remembers that God has carried burdens before and will do so again. Hope becomes a habit of trust rather than a fleeting emotion. Surrender also opens the heart to receive comfort. When burdens are clutched tightly, comfort has little room to enter, but when they are released, God's comfort flows in. This comfort does not always remove pain, but it brings strength to endure it. And where comfort is present, hope is never far behind. In surrender, we learn that God's grace is sufficient. We discover that we do not need to have everything together to be held together by Him. Weakness becomes a doorway for divine strength. The pressure to appear strong fades, replaced by the peace of being honest before God. Hope grows in this honesty. There are seasons when surrender means forgiving others or ourselves. Unforgiven pain is one of the heaviest burdens the heart can carry. Releasing it to God is not easy, but it is necessary for hope to heal. Forgiveness does not erase the past, but it frees the future. And hope thrives in freedom. Surrender reminds us that we are not defined by what we lack, but by the God we trust. Even in scarcity, hope remains alive because God's resources are endless. Even in loss, hope survives because God's love is constant. Surrender anchors hope in something unshakable. When burdens are surrendered, faith matures. It moves from dependence on circumstances to reliance on God's character. Faith learns to say, even if things do not change, God is still good. This kind of faith sustains hope through the darkest valleys. Hope renewed through surrender does not promise an easy path, but it promises a meaningful one. It assures us that no suffering is wasted and no tear is unseen. God walks with us, carries us, and works within us. Surrender keeps us close to Him, where hope is continually restored. As burdens are released, gratitude often follows. The heart becomes aware of God's presence in small mercies and quiet moments. Gratitude strengthens hope by reminding us of what is still good, even in difficult seasons. Surrender shifts focus from what is missing to what remains. Surrender also invites transformation. It changes how we respond to hardship, how we treat others, and how we view ourselves. Hope becomes less dependent on outcomes and more anchored in faith. Life may still be challenging, but it no longer feels hopeless. Ultimately, hope is renewed when we trust that God is both willing and able to carry what we cannot. Surrender is the doorway to that trust. It is a daily choice, sometimes a painful one, but always a life-giving one. When we place our burdens into God's hands, we discover that those hands are gentle, strong, and faithful. And in that discovery, hope is not only restored, it is strengthened. It becomes steady rather than shaky, deep rather than shallow, enduring rather than temporary. Surrender teaches us that hope does not come from holding on tighter, but from letting go and trusting God completely.